Om Bhur Swa Om Tatsavitarvaraniyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yonaha Prachodayat. May that infinite light bless all human beings, and I bow to it. I bow to my Guru in that light. I bow to you as a manifestation of that light. My Guru used to tell us, I heard him say it many times, I killed Yogananda long ago. No one dwells in this body now, in this temple now, but God. We have to understand that, and he always spoke from that level, but he never went to the extent of saying, I am God. Because I, when you use the word I in a human body, you're referring to the body. That wasn't his I. I looked at him in the eyes many times, and I never saw ego there. I never saw any flicker of pleasure or displeasure, wonderful humor, wonderful joy, wonderful love, yes. But never a personality in the ordinary human sense, because although he had a personality, it was that he displayed certain qualities, but he did not display them as, I am this kind of person. He could be equally lucid, talking to bankers, fishermen, poor people, everybody. He was just a reflection, like a flawless mirror to everyone he met. I used, as I've mentioned before, I couldn't remember what he looked like. It's strange because I saw him so often. But the only way I could really get a clear picture of him was when I would look at a photograph of him. The photograph captured him in one pose, and I could meditate on that pose and get a clearer picture. But he was beyond any kind of he was just constantly fluid. He was always expressing, in a way he was expressing what that person was, but never that person's personality. It was always that he was looking at them from above as if from their own higher self and talking to them in that way. Thus it was that people who were with him many years got the false impression that they knew him better than anyone else. Nobody can know him at all, so what to speak of knowing him better? But we can explain something of what it was like to be with him. And I've always remembered two photographs that were particularly interesting because they were so very diverse. One was a picture of him standing next to the president of Mexico. His name at that time was Portes Gil, and because portly in English has another meaning, it seemed awfully apt because he was portly and sort of like this. And oddly enough, when my Guru was standing next to him, he looked like sort of an Indian image of Portes Gil. You could see some of that consciousness there, which made him look even physically somewhat like him. Now, a person has one body. He can't change the body. It doesn't easily become actually different. It was the consciousness that was the same. The interesting thing about that is that I also saw a picture of him posed next to Amelita Galli-Curci, who was a very famous coloratura soprano in Italy, one of the most famous, perhaps the most famous of her time. And when he was with her, she was thin and frail and rather old. And the odd thing is, he didn't look old, but he looked thin and frail. Now, how could one person look portly and frail in two different pictures? It was the consciousness. The consciousness that you see in so many different people it is because they have that consciousness, not those features necessarily. I have seen people who were very worldly and full of material desires and ego and so on. And it showed in their faces. You didn't have to talk to them and find out from their words that they were that way. And I've seen them live in our community because they had enough desire for God to want to live among spiritual people, but they really weren't there yet. I've seen them a few weeks, a few months, a year later, completely different people. You might not recognize them. And so it is. I remember one person who was in a down mood. That same person whom I knew well, I could not recognize. I had to ask, and then I suddenly saw so much had that face changed. So, yes, you are yourself. Your body reflects the kind of person inside it, and it will take on the shape also. But the thing is, it's usually one personality. That he could be so many different people. It was because he wasn't himself. And when he was with people, he reflected back to them their own personalities. I don't mean that if they were egotistical, he reflected ego. He reflected their higher self's reaction to that ego. That's quite different. If they were angry, he didn't get angry, but he looked at them in such a way that they must have understood that I'm not quite in tune, I'm not doing quite what I should. And so it is, there were times when I wasn't doing as well as I could. I could understand it from a glimpse. That taught me more than words. Now, there are saints who get a wrong handle on this thing in the Upanishads and the Shastras, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. And they make the mistake of saying that I am that when, as my Guru said, nobody should say that. He is. As one time he, in his Bhagavad Gita interpretations, he said that the soul, when it attains liberation, it sees that God went through all those particular incarnations. It is one with God, but it also remembers having been particularly God in these forms. And those forms can be resurrected, but there is no sense of separateness. You are one with God. Well, one restless Indian disciple there was present when somebody was reading this from his Bhagavad Gita interpretations. And the disciple said, well, sir, that means you are God. And Master said, no, why do you say that? He is God. Yes, but you say you are one with him, therefore you are God. And he went on like this and wouldn't let up. And finally, Master just said, he who says he is, isn't, and he who says he isn't, isn't, and just left it at that. But it was kind of a charming passage in my book. It's in the path. Anyway, let me read to you an encounter that my Guru had with what was really a saint, but not quite wise enough, perhaps. This is Conversation 209. When I was a boy, I went to a man who, so I'd been told, was a great saint. I went with humility, as I approach every manifestation of the divine, and bowed reverently before him. He, when he saw my devotion, decided to impress me further. He declared, I am God. You don't say so, I cried, leaping to my feet. I had a little pocket mirror with me, which I used as an aid to introspection. Facing this mirror toward him, I demanded, is that God? It is not the God I am seeking. Turning, I strode out of the room. That man was truly sincere, however. He'd made a common mistake of thinking that the scriptures, in declaring I am Aham Brahmasmi, I and the infinite Brahman are one, mean one may say also of oneself, I am God. This is an error. How can the little ego be infinite? The man, rising hastily from his seat, ran after me. Bowing before me, he said, "You have awakened me from a great delusion. I want to thank you." I accepted his apology and then said, "The ocean is all of its waves. The wave, however, should never say, 'I am the ocean,' even after it has realized its own oneness with the ocean." The man understood and thanked me sincerely. He then prostrated before me in full pranam, in the full gaze of his students. "You have awakened me," he repeated, "from a great delusion." "You are a great soul indeed," I said to him. "Otherwise you would not have admitted your error so quickly, especially before your own students. And when shown to you by a mere boy, you have proved to me your greatness." Well, but the important thing is always, when you read the scriptures, understand their spirit. Don't ever think that when they say such things as aham brahman asmi, that you can talk in that way. I have met Indian pundits and sadhus and so on who declare that. They haven't shown that consciousness. This man had much more of that consciousness. But I am not one to correct others, and so I don't say anything. Master it was his job, therefore he did correct him. For myself, when people say like that, I just sort of leave it to their own karma and don't say anything. But I do see an awful lot of folly in this world. I told you the story recently about a big bear of a man who, we were talking about God, and I told him at that time, actually it's been many more, but I told him at that time, I think I may have met as many as 6 people who knew God. And he put out this hairy paw. He was a very big man. He said, "Sheikh, you just met the 7th. His very statement showed that he was not the 7th. He didn't know what he was talking about, and I've met an awful lot of sadhus who don't know what they're talking about. They make claims that they can't justify by their behavior. And if you see somebody sitting, for example, with his eyes blinking restlessly, you can know he's restless. My guru met one man in New York who claimed to go into cosmic consciousness. Well, my guru saw that it was a delusion, but he didn't want to just say that's a delusion. So he said, "Well, come to my room." And so the man came to his room and he said, "Well, sit here and go into cosmic consciousness for me." And the man was sitting there restless, with his eyes restless, and finally couldn't stand the suspense. He said, "Why don't you ask me where I am?" And my guru said, "Well, all right, where are you?" "On top of the dome of the Taj Mahal." And my guru said, "Well, there must be something wrong with your own dome. I see you sitting right here." And then the man said, all right, test me again." Well, my guru said, "If you can go from New York to the Taj Mahal in India, then surely you can go downstairs and tell me what you see in the restaurant of this hotel." And so the man, he believed himself. He believed these things were so. He just had a very active imagination. And mind you, an imagination is a good quality. It's just that you've got to be honest with yourself also. So he went into this samadhi of his, blinking his eyes all the time, and said, "Well, in the restaurant, there's a piano on the right by the front door, and 2 women have just come in," and he described a few things. They weren't that way at all. Master described them as they were. Then they went downstairs and went into the restaurant, and the man could see with his own eyes that it wasn't at all the way he'd visualized it. But he had a very strong imagination. Then he was able to, he awoke from that delusion. But my guru couldn't tell him at that point, when the first man first made that declaration, "You're in delusion." He had to show him. But his job was to help us to see the truth behind everything. You won't know the full truth just by reading the scriptures. I've met so many people who think they know, but they're educated idiots. They're like that philosopher and the boatman in the song I sang recently, where the philosopher thought because he knew all these philosophies, well, actually it's a translation of an ancient story in India of a Vedic scholar who thought that he knew all the four Vedas. And he asked this boatman, have you studied the first Veda? And the boatman said, I haven't read. Well, then, my good man, a quarter of your life is as good as lost. And tell me, have you read the second of the Vedas? I told you before, I'm unschooled. My job is rowing this boat. In that case, my good man, half of your life is as good as lost. And then, suddenly, a great storm came up, and it was lashing the river to foam, and it looked as if their boat would capsize. And the boatman, over the noise of the wind, said, my good man, knower of the four Vedas, you have called me ignorance, because I didn't know half of the two of the four Vedas. He said, now I want to ask you one question. Can you swim? Oh, I can't swim a stroke, the philosopher cried. And then the boatman said, I'm sorry to say that the whole of your life will very soon be lost. And the boat capsized, the boatman jumped into the water and with powerful strokes reached the shore. But the pundit drowned because he couldn't swim. He didn't have experience, in other words, and that's the meaning of the story. So don't pontificate. Don't think you're wise just because you have knowledge. Be in the Spirit. Love God and just be wrapped in His consciousness. That is the meaning of this song, which I wrote after visiting the island of Patmos in Greece, where St. John wrote the Apocalypse or the Revelation. I hope you like it. Joy to you. I was caught up in ecstasy. 'Twas a day sanctified by God. There He showed me the truths of heaven, truths which all seeking Him should know. How the soul made to live in freedom can reclaim its eternal right how the night, born of our delusions, can be fired, blazing